on with the computer. Nina, I will ask you to show the slides.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be able to share with you ISATCOVE, our international self-assessment tool for Centers of Vocational Excellence. And we can go immediately to the next slide.
Следующий слайд, Nina.
So I'm presenting a tool that is developed as part of our project Internationalizing Vocational Excellence. And we also use the term INVE as abbreviation, but it's an EU-funded project. And with this project, we aim to support centers of vocational excellence, centers that are new to the concept of vocational excellence, or VET providers aiming to work on vocational excellence to further enhance vocational excellence. So it's we are really aiming to support everyone who would like to work on vocational excellence, whether you have a lot of experience in the field or whether you're just starting to work on the concept. Also focusing both on initial VET as well as adult education. If we can go to the next slide.
Следующий слайд, пожалуйста, Nina.
So as part of the project, or maybe better to say as core of the project, we have developed ISATCOVE, the International Self-Assessment Tool for Centers of Vocational Excellence. And this tool is also based on the experiences in general. The project is based on the experiences we have with ENE and with the ISAT tool. So this tool is developed based on ISAT, and we are currently also looking at how we can combine, how we can merge the two tools. I will now focus on ISATCOVE, which you can also use to enter ENE. ISATCOVE is a comprehensive tool, or is aiming to cover all aspects of vocational excellence. Manu already mentioned that there are different definitions of what the Center of Vocational Excellence is, what vocational excellence is, and we try to cover really the broad range of activities that the Center of Vocational Excellence can employ. And it's based on the Erasmus Plus call for Centers of Vocational Excellence. The tool is flexible, also to be able to adjust it to the different contexts, the different definitions of Centers of Vocational Excellence, which means that when you use ISATCOVE, and I will explain more later on, you can select those criteria and indicators that are relevant to your context or where you would like to focus on because you have specific objectives you would like to achieve. The tool is inclusive. As mentioned before, you can use it when you are just starting to work on the concept of vocational excellence, but you can also use it when you are more experienced to see where you are in relation to vocational excellence. What is a difference also with ISAT is that ISATCOVE encourages you to involve different stakeholders. So the tool really supports you in receiving feedback from the different stakeholders the Centers of Vocational Excellence work with in your countries. So it supports you in sending out questionnaires, for example, to learners, to employers, research organizations you might be working with. I already heard applied research before as well. So it encourages you to receive feedback from all the different stakeholders that the centers work with. And the tool allows you to learn from others because the tool provides you with the possibility to compare, for example, your center with other centers in the same sector or in the same country, same region, of the same size internationally. We already have centers who participated in ISATCOVE from many different countries, from Europe, but also outside Europe. So we already have quite a lot of centers you can compare yourself with. Next slide, please.
Следующий слайд, Nina.
So here you can see an overview of the ISATCOVE framework. As I mentioned before, ISATCOVE consists of 3 dimensions: teaching and learning, partnership and coordination, and governance and funding. And each of these dimensions is divided into criteria. And you see here that there are 10 criteria for teaching and learning, 7 for partnership and cooperation, and 6 for governance and funding. And then each of these criteria is again divided into indicators to make it really measurable. And we have 577 indicators, and this often sounds very overwhelming. But as I mentioned before, the tool is flexible. You don't need to select, and we even don't expect any center to select all the criterion indicators. No, it's up to the center or maybe at national level to decide which criteria and indicators of vocational excellence are relevant in the given context. And so you can make a selection there. Next slide, please.
Следующий слайд, Нина, пожалуйста.
Next slide, please.
So, one back.
Один
Thank you.
обратно.
Yeah, perfect. So here you see the first dimension, teaching and learning, and I will not mention all the criteria, but just to give you an idea of which criteria are there. So this is the dimension teaching and learning, and you see that it covers all different aspects of teaching and learning. Before, one of the colleagues from Kazakhstan also mentioned like the training of teachers. It's there. You see that the ninth criterion is about teachers and trainers have mastered a wide range of VET pedagogies, learning resources, methods, assessment, and educational technologies for VET, and they collaborate to improve and innovate teaching and learning. This, of course, involves that teachers also follow continuous professional development. Retraining of adults, you see here reflected as well. It also includes recognition and validation of prior learning. Lifelong learning is mentioned in the second criterion. So you see that it really covers a wide range of different aspects of teaching and learning. An important thing reflected through all of them is also to ensure that training programs are up to date and relevant in relation to labor market and societal needs. Next slide, please.
Следующий слайд, Нина.
Next slide.
This is the second dimension for partnership and cooperation. And here you see that it really focuses on the collaboration with industry and enterprise to deliver and improve training and skills acquisition, but also to do what was, we heard the applied research. You see here also the one on innovation technology and research centers to conduct and apply diffuse innovation and research. But here you can really see that you do it in collaboration with others. So it's not just a VET provider center doing it, but really collaborating together to achieve vocational excellence in the skills ecosystem. Next slide, please.
Следующий слайд.
So this is the third dimension, governance and funding. Also here, the collaboration is again reflected with different partners, but you see, for example, also the possibility to exercise sufficient autonomy as a center to make your own choices in relation to vocational excellence. Then funding, infrastructure are mentioned, and also quality assurance and developing as a learning organization as the last part. And here I also refer to EKVET, and Manuel referred to EKVET before as well. So this is just an overview of the 23 criteria that ISATCOVE consists of. If we move to the next slide, I will also give an example of some of the indicators. Thank you. So here you see an example of teaching and learning criterion 1. Skills provision is relevant and responsive to the labor market and to society. And you see here a number of indicators. The criterion exists of even more indicators, but just to give you an example. Because the interesting thing I would like to highlight here is that you see in the column at the right, that it mentions respondents. And I mentioned before that the tool supports you as centers to also invite or engage stakeholders in the self-assessment. And here, when you select indicators, you can see which stakeholder is addressed. And it means that it will, if you select this indicator, it will become part of a survey, of a questionnaire that will be sent out to the specific stakeholder group. So, for example, the first indicators you see, they are all addressed to the self-assessment team. So in the design and review of our programs, a wide range of tools to generate labor market data is used. The self-assessment team, and I will come back to that later, is an important team in implementing, in designing and implementing the self-assessment, and will consist of will be part of the school. I will come back to the self-assessment team later. Then you see, for example, below the indicators for the self-assessment team, that there are also indicators, for example, for employers, learners, and graduates. And so this means that if you would select these indicators, that they will become part of a survey that will be sent out to the employers you would like to, or a center would like to include, or to the learners or to the graduates. So the tool really supports this kind of 360 feedback. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you see in brief the phases we distinguish when implementing ISATCOVE. First, we say, okay, it's important to familiarize yourself with the framework and the tool, either national level, at the level of the center, wherever the decision is taken to use ISATCOVE or not. Then the next step is, of course, to decide, is this tool relevant for us, for the purpose you have? And you can make a decision whether or not to use ISATCOVE. And once you have decided to use ISATCOVE, we see 3 phases of implementing ISATCOVE. First, it's the planning and the design of ISATCOVE. So here to plan, when will you implement ISATCOVE and which criteria and indicators will you include in ISATCOVE. Once you've selected the criteria and indicators, you can launch the self-assessment, which means that the self-assessment, that the tool will send out the different questionnaires to the different stakeholders and to the self-assessment team of the center. And so it will allow for a time frame, and the center can decide on the time frame in which respondents can reply to those questionnaires. Then, once you decide to close the questionnaires, an important phase is there. It's the actual self-assessment, because the tool will not calculate a score for each criterion at the criterion level. You will have all the data through the indicators, and then it's up to the self-assessment team, and I will show it on the other slide, to come up with the final scoring of each criterion, because the final score depends on many things, on, for example, how many respondents did reply, but also on the context. One indicator can be more important in your context, but maybe not as important in another context. So the scoring is really part of the self-assessment process and the reflections within the self-assessment team. And the last stage is then also to come up with a development plan based on the outcomes of the self-assessment, to start developing or further enhancing the vocational excellence, and to monitor the progress. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
So here, some of the points to take into consideration when deciding whether or not to conduct the self-assessment is the vision for excellence, the work already in place on vocational excellence, strategic plans, maybe work plans at the center level. Try to integrate it, is what we always advise in the ongoing processes like quality assurance, planning of yearly work plans, activity plans, etc. And also to evaluate whether you have the resources available, the time, so part of resources, and the stakeholders you would like to involve And you see here a short estimation of how long it takes to implement ISATCOVE, and we often say it's around 6 to 8 weeks, which around 30 or 40 hours of the self-assessment team to work on the self-assessment. And if you can integrate this in regular processes, we have heard from many of the centers that have been implementing it now. They said it could sound like a lot, but if we can use it for what we do already and for improving the vocational excellence of our center, it's very valuable, and it offers us many insights to further improve. Next slide, please. So this is the planning of the self-assessment. I already said, it takes around 6 to 8 weeks. And you see more information here about the planning. I already highlighted some of these steps. It's about planning and designing the self-assessment, conducting the self-assessment, and then also the assessment of the final assessment of the selected criteria. I mentioned the self-assessment team before. They really play a key role in implementing the self-assessment, as they define the timetable of the assessment, they select the criteria and indicators, which stakeholders to involve, they decide on which stakeholders to involve, and they also might make the final judgments of the different scores and write the development plan. And we always advise to have the self-assessment team consisting of someone from senior management, for example, also heads of departments or units, someone who has access to school administrative data like enrollment rates, graduation rates, etc. Someone or more persons representing the teaching staff, maybe also a learner, and very important, also someone who has the liaison function with the industry and enterprise or all the stakeholders you work with. Next slide, please. Yeah. So here you see a screenshot of ISATCOVE of the tool. And when you design the self-assessment, you can select here the dimensions. You see the dimensions: teaching and learning, partnership and cooperation, and governance and funding. And if we go to the next slide, please. You see here, if you select one of the dimensions, and you can select criteria across all the dimensions, but this is just an example, that you can click on the criteria you would like to include. And then if we go to the next slide. Yeah. Maybe is it possible to click, or do we go to the, yeah, exactly. Thank you. So here you see then, once you select criteria, you will see the indicators that are related to this, or that belong to this criterion. And here you see again that it shows the respondents. And if you select, you can either select or deselect the indicators. It means that it will be included in the surveys. It will be sent out once the self-assessment is launched. So here you see again the different responders, like teachers and trainers, the school assessment team. But sometimes there are also indicators that are addressed to several respondents, which you see in the pink one. It's not translated, but it mentions 2 respondents, which means that it will be sent out to 2 different respondents. Next slide, please. Yeah, so an important question is always like how to select criteria and indicators. And I mentioned before, the tool is flexible, so it's up to you. What we are, you can, for example, select a wide range, do a comprehensive self-assessment. You can also decide to focus on one dimension or on specific criteria because they are relevant to you at this moment. At the moment, we have also a certificate, a Committed to Excellence certificate, a badge. which will be awarded to centers who have implemented the self-assessment tool for at least 50 indicators and who have developed a development plan based on the indicators. And this shows that you're committed to work on vocational excellence. It doesn't imply anything on the level of vocational excellence. We are piloting also a vocational excellence certificate at the moment with 4 centers, where we also look at the level of performance. And here, for the pilot, it's required to include at least 13 criteria and at least half of the indicators for each criterion, and also to develop a development plan. I also, aware of time, maybe I briefly show, yeah, we can skip this, yeah, the next slide. One further. Yeah, thank you. This is, for example, I mentioned before, it sends surveys to the different stakeholders. We can go back one.
Обратно, пожалуйста, один слайд.
Еще дальше.
Нет, обратно, пожалуйста.
No, the other.
Нет, в другую сторону. Предыдущий слайд, Нина. Еще один.
Yeah, perfect. So this is an example of.
Нет. Мы вот.
Yeah, perfect. This is an example of how the survey looks like that will be sent to the different stakeholders. This is one probably for learners or maybe a graduate, like the internship I did in enterprise as part of my program at the school helped me to practice and not read it, implement, improve skills relevant to my professional training. And so you see here that this survey only consists of 4 questions because it's an example, but you can include more questions for the learners. And similar surveys are sent out to the other stakeholders and also to the self-assessment team. Then if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so I said before, the criterion scoring is not done automatically. What you will get is a dashboard with the information, with the data, the scores for each of the indicators you have included in your self-assessment. And it will can look like this slide. And then it's up to the self-assessment team to do the final scoring. So on the slide you see at the bottom, green is 10 is a very high score, 0 is performed poorly. And as a self-assessment team, you look at the data you received based on the indicators, and you come up with the final score for each criterion. And there is also this field where you can explain why you gave yourself the score you gave yourself. So then we can go to the last slide. Yeah, because what we assume is that the self-assessment, conducting the self-assessment, is just the starting point and not the end of a process. It's a great opportunity to see where you are in relation to vocational excellence, the different criteria related to vocational excellence. But then what do you do next with the results? What I said before, you can compare yourself with other centers, for example, in the same country, as if there are centers from the same country participating, or maybe you work in sector tourism and hospitality, and you want to compare yourself with other centers in other countries working in the same sector. So there's a possibility to compare yourself with others. As part of the process, we encourage centers to set development goals, to set development targets, and to formulate improvement plans or development plans to further enhance vocational excellence. And an important step we recommend as well is then, of course, to inform the stakeholders that you involved in the self-assessment process about the results and your next steps. And then hopefully with the plan, also monitor the progress and enhance vocational excellence. Thank you.